My name is Queen Tambori, and I'm very excited to be facilitating this panel. And I think a big part of my work has been cut out for me. We want to basically look at the 4 questions that have been shown on the slides, and maybe if there are any other issues that could arise. But before we get into the questions, maybe I'm just going, could we have a mic? All right. Maybe I will allow the speakers to possibly introduce themselves briefly, if there's anything I left out. And as they do so, they can also tell us what they feel. Do they feel like we need gender desks in Newsroom? Is it necessary, or it is a waste of time, money, and resources? Let me start with you, Millicent.
Okay, thank you very much. I will not talk about the book. I will talk about experience. I am the deputy or assistant editor-in-chief in the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation. So if you ask me, is there need to have a gender desk in a newsroom? I will tell you that yes, we should have a gender desk in the newsroom, but after certain processes have been put into place. So these processes should come first before giving birth to the gender desks. And when I talk about the processes, I'm talking about take the managers, take them through the importance of having a gender desk. First, tell them what gender is. Because I studied a talk on gender in my newsroom, and I was accused of sexual harassment. Are we together? And I was basically talking about gender. So the word gender means different things to different people. And I thank AGECS for taking teams through this training. At the Kenya Broadcasting Corporation, we have a gender mainstreaming policy. This gender mainstreaming policy cuts across the term gender, because in it, they look at the sexes, and they've also put in disability in it. So disability is also looked at as a gender. Out of this, the HR, human resource, has also been brought in. So under human resource, then what do we look at? We are looking at the number of employees that we are having, male and female. But how does this reflect in the newsroom, which is the question you're asking me? The newsrooms still have a lot of biases, and we need to deal with these. I will give you a case example. During the protests, all the men went underground. I only had female reporters. So it's the female who went out to the field. The men surfaced at 5 in the evening. What do you do as the in charge? Do you discipline these people? So we just had a round table, and we are talking, and they told me, you see, you people always talk about equality. So why are you telling us that we are the ones who should have come here first? So according to them, this word gender means equality. That's when I realized that we need to talk a lot more about the word gender and what it stands for. When it comes to assigning stories, yes, just as the protests that I've talked about, somebody will tell you, a reporter will tell you, I don't want this assignment. Send a lady. When you're talking about women issues, the pads, the menses, somebody is telling you to send a lady. But we are telling them, no, the ladies know what they are going through. the men ought to know what the women are going through. Therefore, it's best to send a man. So yes, we need these gender desks. I talked about LGBTQ. And I want to tell you, I was almost lynched when I talked about LGBTQ. And why was I talking about LGBTQ? Because it was an issue that was being experienced in the entire country, from the apex court to parliament. I felt that there was need for the newsroom to discuss this more, because I was being asked, why are we only inviting opponents and not proponents of LGBTQ? And so I will ask this team, is LGBTQ a gender issue? I went at another forum to talk to young youth. And by young youth, I'm talking about age 9 to 13. And I gave them all papers. And I told them, write in your bad handwriting what you want us to discuss in this sitting. And they all wrote in their various handwritings without indicating their names. 80% of them wanted to talk about wanted their convener to talk about LGBTQ. And they even added a plus. When I told the parents, they were shocked. And we realized that actually we need to talk about gender to the parents and not the... I think I'll talk until tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Millicent. Very pertinent issues raised there. And so Joe Millicent has raised the fact that the word gender means different things to different people. In your own words, what does it, when the word gender pops up, what comes to mind? And do you think then that newsrooms need to have gender desks?
Thank you, Quinta. Yes, I think newsrooms should have gender desks for a number of reasons. Africa and Kenya in particular, we come from a background which is highly patriarchal. And our newsrooms are dominated by people who are products of a certain upbringing, both the men and the women. And yet, these are people who will be entrusted with generating content for a society which is now conscious and has a different view of things from the view that was inculcated in them. You know, you are growing up in a household where the role of a man is, the man is seen in a particular way and the woman is viewed in a particular way. And then suddenly you move on to the newsroom. And it's very easy for your perspective or your view of gender to influence your content selection or the decisions you make when you end up as a reporter or even as an editor. And I think that having a gender desk in a newsroom, one, first of all, sends a statement that there's an issue around gender. You can't go on as if it's business as usual. We are caught in a time of transition, and you should be thinking of things differently. It's very easy to see a gender desk as the place which will generate content which recognizes the rights of women or is more sensitive to women or will redress the balance of men-women coverage in news. But I think that that desk must see its role as touching on content, pushing for a balance in content, pushing for sensitivity, but also as opening the eyes of and opening the minds of the people who work in the newsroom. Yeah, It actually has a role, and I don't know whether they play that role right now. It has a role to engage the journalists, engage management, because there have to be policies. If you're trying to change practices and you're trying to change people's minds, it's more than just coming up with a handbook of editorial, what we could do, with editorial content. The people who are generating this content have to be engaged in a conversation. Yeah, there's a conversation which awakens them to the new reality and make them think of things differently. So this gender desk to me deals with content, yes, but has to also be part of the culture change in the workplace. Engaging HR, engaging the journalists, yeah, and being alert to all manifestations of insensitivity to the gender question. It's not an easy thing. I read the Nation's pullout on Friday. And actually I read it with a keen eye because there's something I do and I was telling Dorcas this, that when I saw it, my first reaction was, I hope that this is not going to be very shrill about women's rights. Yeah? Because if that happens, they're going to lose that connection, product-audience relationship. And that is the nature of our society, that gender is seen primarily as an instrument of championing or redressing the imbalance between men and women. So my concern was, is there going to be journalism here which plays to the interests of audiences, editorial interests of audiences, and pushes the gender agenda without being very shrill and in your face? Because the nature of the African media landscape is that consumers of content tend to react in certain ways to certain issues. When they hear human rights, they hear gender, there are certain things, you bring them up and they say, oh, it's that crowd again. And they just lock their minds. So one of the challenges for a gender desk really is, how do you practice journalism? How do you generate content which connects with audiences and content which advance the gender agenda without alienating the audiences? Yeah, subliminal effect, I would call it. Be very interesting, but at the same time. So my concern was that, and I told her that I was happy about the pullout. Although lately I have seen that NGO tone coming in. Now, I don't want to turn this into an evaluation. But I'm just saying that is the risk. That is the real risk when we discuss this, the gender issue in journalism. It's the same thing about human rights. I tell people, human rights is very much part of news as it's covered every day. Every time you highlight the abuse of a child by a stepmother, that's human rights. And the word human rights doesn't have to appear in the story. Yeah? Every time you expose corruption, you are really standing up for the rights of those who pay taxes and the way their resources are being abused, and those in power are misusing the authority they have. So the approach to me for the gender desk has to be very creative. It has to be creative. It has to understand the audience it is catering to, but it deals with content, but also has to work on the community in the newsroom so that you change minds, you change relations, you change policies, and create an environment where this becomes something that people take into account without thinking. You don't have to pause and say, hey, have I a fair balance between the men and women's voices in this story? It shouldn't be something you stop to think about. It should just happen naturally.
Thank you so much, Joe. Mr. Duda, Joe has brought up an issue about activism versus journalism. You've been in the media house for a while, and now you're also in the world of academia. Is it possible to attain a balance, acceptable balance? And then how then do we, because most of our gender desks are funded, And when it comes to funding, they also have their obligations. So how do we strike a balance?
Thank you. And first, my confessions that the gender desk at Nation, I'm the one who did the proposal that brought the money that started it. Now, so it means that for me, question number one is yes. But two, that's the dilemma that we now had to deal with and continuously deal with. Do you want to pander to the whims of the donors? Do you want to pander to the whims of the shrill, as Joe says, NGO fraternity? No. You're a journalist who is talking about issues affecting gender, male and female. For us, and us here, if I wear the hat that I had at Nation then, which I still wear because I work closely with Dorcas and team, is that you must not in any way antagonize your audiences by the kind of content that you put out. And how do you antagonize your audiences? By taking some firm positions. In journalism, your role is to expose issues. Let the audience make their judgment. If you're talking about gender issues, imbalances, say the imbalances without really, as Joe puts it, putting it that now this is a gender issue. Just talk about this and people see that whatever's coming out here is an imbalance between men and women, boys and girls. Now, having said that, one of the things that we've seen is also the idea of having, or let me put it this way, there's a risk of a gender desk being seen as a ghetto where people sit there and look only for, matters affecting women. Now, that should be not the case. And why? Gender issues permeate through all sectors of the economy, be it health, be it education, be it politics. And I need to illustrate. When Nation was starting the gender desk, this was the genesis. Nation had started a health desk before in 2016. Now, as you were doing stories on health, you could see that there was a gap. A number of health issues affect girls, affect women. So you can see the connection. And then being said that, no, it's not just health in isolation. The next thing is, you see health in connection, gender in connection to education. When a girl is not educated, now a girl is, destined to poverty and, exclusion. So you begin to see the connection. And this is the point that we've kept on saying, that the gender desk and the content from there must take a composite, a way of looking at things and putting this thing in the face. And then talk about representation. That if you talk about, for example, who is, who comes to the talk show in the evening. If it is only males who are paraded there, there's a problem. But then, which ties with what you were saying, how do you then help newsroom people to appreciate the dynamics that if you want to have more female coming to your talk shows, you must prepare them in advance. You don't tell them at 6 o'clock and the show is at 6:30. Because men will just come from the bar and say, I'm available. And then, but the lady will not. So if you know you're going to have a panel discussion, on food security, which affect female, affect male, affect children, then you have to have prior conversation with, the females you have to bring on board. Which then now speaks to the point of the gender desk helping in inculcating in the minds of the news people that if you want to treat, or when you want to bring the voice of men and women, you must also think of their conditions under which they come to your table. And that's the point that then helps the gender desk to become a representation of the voices of people in society. Let me stop at that point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Okay, I'm going to come back to you again, Millicent. The conversation surrounding the availability of women when it comes to sources, which is one of the issues that we grapple with in the newsroom, is very sensitive because a lot of times we are accused of having panels made up of men. And the reasoning behind it is that women are rarely unavailable for interviews, as Aduda has rightfully said. I know from experience, what do you think are some of the other challenges surrounding trying to embrace, the woman in every story? How do we ensure that our gender desks actually succeed? Because we have two media organizations from Tanzania and Uganda who are looking forward to, thriving and making sure that their gender desks are fully operational. How do we go over some of these challenges that surround operating the gender desk?
Okay, I think I started by giving examples of what is happening in my newsroom. So when I was talking about these, I call them boys and girls because they're my daughters and sons. When these boys and girls do not yet appreciate the need of a gender desk or what gender itself is all about, whether it's male and female and representation, they will easily come up with a manual. But if you take them through what gender representation should mean in terms of we need both representation, we need equality, we need to hear all voices. If you start by training them on that, by being affirmative on number one, you'll not have a problem with number two. And I will explain. When we were having the elections, I remember we used to have various programs across the media. At KBC, we used to have Kenya Yamua. And you could find that there are times when the producers, especially the male producers, are inviting guests. You'll have 4 men. I had to talk to them and tell them, no, we need the women voices. So how do I get the women? You prepare them in advance. When you prepare the women in advance, they will come. And when you tell your team that we must have women, they will be there. And I know that it got to a point that they knew that if the interviewer is a woman, we are safe because we are only looking for one other woman and 2 men. So the availability of women is a problem, but you have to prepare them. You must prepare them. We must have them. And I must also add that we also developed a fallback position where you know that if I invite Amdani, she will come. If I invite, there are those names that if you call, even if it's 10 o'clock or 11, they shall come. So we were hiding behind that at times to be able to have a balance. And we insisted by telling them that equality must be there. So I know it's not easy. And something else that I discovered worked, we used to offer transport to the women and not the men. So we could tell them that we'll send a taxi for you. Are you okay with that? We used to add that. But to the men, akuna, as Aduda says, wanatoka kwa pub na wanakuja. Yeah. So you have to be very, very, what do we say? You have to really decide on what you want and you will get it. If you don't, you'll not. I think something I can add before I give it to my next speaker. You've noticed that in the shows that we've had with the president, KBC has always had a female journalist. I don't know whether you've noticed that. That stems from that. Asanteni.
Good morning. It's not yet, yeah. Good morning, yeah. Yes, I'm tempted to agree 12% with the conversation on males and also to disagree 92%. But first, I apologize. I thought the assignment was starting at midday, only to get here to find it is almost halfway done. So, sorry for that. Yeah. I believe the conversation on gender is self-defeatist because we are reducing it into a tokenistic measure of abiding and not abiding. So I will say that the place of gender desks in newsrooms was 95. We are in a space where, whether communication, politics, or banking, the outlook is supposed to be gendered. So we should be talking about gendered journalism in such a way that it doesn't matter how we aggregate news, that there's no special category that requires tokenistic measures to feel included. Because you notice that when you have gender desk, inequalities in reporting increase. In the 90s, when we joined journalism, there were no gender desks. And we had very robust features desk. And you could see very proactive issues affecting society. Not women, not men. There was a conversation around issues that are, what are societal stories? When I was in the newsroom 5 years ago, there was always an assumption that things to do with women and children push to gender desks. And those things will get prime space near the obituary. So the idea will be that gender desks is a good, the intention may be good, but it reinforces the illusion of inclusion, because you are just saying we have gender desk, but technically it manifests the exclusion that we need to solve. So the solution will be that manels don't happen because journalists are the problem. Manels happen because journalism is in a society where the women's voice or the other marginalized groups are not included. And these voices are in education, in banking, in politics. So unless we now have a gendered approach to journalism in politics and other spheres, whatever we do in the newsrooms shall remain tokenistic. And our grandchildren will still be having the same conversations which our grandfathers had. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dennis. I think I'm going to bring it back to my panel. Anybody has a reaction to what Dennis has said? Millicent?
Yeah, Dennis, thank you so much. I think that's a discussion that can take a whole year. And nobody will be said to be right or wrong. But we have to agree that there are certain stories that must be told by being given a certain bias. I will talk about a story. I love talking about stories that I'm close to. I have a cousin. This cousin is a widow. The mother-in-law is also a widow. So this cousin approached us and told us that the daughter who is been called to university may not get to go to university because she does not have school fees. And we said, this girl has brothers-in-law who are doing well. We even know where some of them work. Why don't we approach them to try and assist? This is their child. This is their wife. In my culture, this is their wife. To my shock, I was told that the brothers-in-law have possessed her farm. When she went to plant for this season, they discovered, the family discovered, my cousin's family, that one of the brother-in-laws had colluded with the mother and had already planted this field. So my cousin has nowhere to grow food for her family. Who will tell this story? When you don't talk to the boy child, he will not see the problem with disinheriting his late brother's wife. He'll say that it is okay. Aende afanye kazi, pia yeye anunue shamba. The story is very rife in Central Province. Every day we are reporting cases of brothers fighting with the girls because they want the shambas. If this is the boy who is in the newsroom, what story will he tell? We must be able to capture this boy in the newsroom and tell him that, hey, we need to change this narrative and we'll be helping a larger society. So I still believe that at times we need biases to change certain things in the society. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Millicent. Joe, talking about biases, there's something that Aduda did before he left Nation, that was to actually apply for funding so that the gender desk is established in the newsroom. Ordinarily or traditionally, you'd expect that probably that is a role or a responsibility that would be done by a female editor, because there's an assumption that only women have, empathetic about maybe the societal issues that affect women. But surprisingly, surprise, they're actually men. We can call them male feminists, we can call them men who have women issues at heart. Ama tunaweza sema wako na umama. No, that was on a light note. But how then do we onboard male allies in this conversation around gender?
How do you find an African man who has a different view of the place of men and women?
Yes.
Oh, maybe to answer you, let me tell a story about there's a product we once launched when I was at the Nation, and at the heart of it was a gender interest. Now, don't shout, don't scream. It was a women's magazine. The thinking at that time, yeah, you approach things in terms of, oh, this will interest women because it will put in content that will interest women. And of course, then you decide that this is what women will be interested in reading. And of course, you go on recipes, nappies, and all. So we launched it driven by the stereotypical values of the time. And from our perspective, of course, you look at the circulation numbers and you're saying, wow, this thing has resonance. It's being read. But shock of surprise of surprises, when we looked at the numbers of the readers, and the marketing surveys also looks at the gender, we found that 45% of its readers were men. Yeah? And it was a shock to us. In fact, the male percentage of the readership, as reflected in the letters that the editor was getting every week, yeah, seemed to be rising. They were more forthcoming. They wanted to dominate the debate. And so concern now rose, how do we keep this thing to be a women's product? And how do we reduce and push out some of these men? The reason why that issue came up was that the advertising department had seen this as something they could sell for women's products to, manufacturers of women products, And now we were watering the reader profile, watering it down. And they actually made a representation and said, you must find a way of sifting the readership and making sure that you have more women reading this product and reduce the number of men. And for me, that signals something about what you are raising. Is that while sensitivity to gender does not necessarily depend on whether you're a man or a woman. It doesn't. Those who picked up that magazine and read it, yeah, men listening in and wanting to participate in what was developed as a women's conversation. Yeah? And there's also people who have done or edited what are presumed to be men's products. We'll tell you also or about the number of women who get on board and want to be part of that conversation. So that you are saying that up to a certain point, media content, the conversations that happen around us are actually gender neutral, but not in the way it's framed academically. Yeah? There are some things that appeal to us because I'm a man, biologically a man, and I'm interested in it. And that does not have to be something that society thinks I should be interested in as a man. Yeah? Same thing with a woman. Now, about the man, the person who you're asking about, a leader who, an ally, yeah, the allies. I think that is the one thing to bear in mind when you're looking for allies. That the ally, you will not find an ally automatically or someone who supports your cause. They will not support your cause because they're a woman. Yeah? And similarly, they will not support the men's cause because it's a man. I think it is your understanding of what is the purpose of gender sensitiveness. What is its purpose? Why are we talking about this? Why has the agenda come to the fore? Someone who appreciates that certain things in society need to be addressed, need to be dealt with. There's a balance, for instance, which needs to be restored. Fairness needs to be enforced. The attitudes that we had should not be perpetuated, yeah, because they are disadvantaging certain people. And in fact, when you think about it, it's about having a just society. Yeah. Just being old-fashioned fairness. Old-fashioned fairness. Yeah. You get somebody who believes in that, you have an ally.
Well said, Joe. As we wind up, David, I'm sure we would love to have this discussion until the cows come home, but time wouldn't allow. As we wind up, David, do you think there are opportunities out there for media organizations to explore this idea of gender equality or equity in the newsroom? What opportunities from experience do you think exist?
Thank you. There are a number of opportunities. The first one is just the repertoire of content that is available there, that you can really mine and bring in more people to your space, bring in more audiences to your newspaper, your online platforms and all that. Because if you are very deliberate about getting content that, now we talk of premium content, part of the content that you go and dig out about stories that affect women and all this would constitute part of that premium content. So there's an opportunity, but that has to be deliberate. The other day, I was in Embu, and I was surprised that they now have in a market, they have a place for women with children. So they market women who go there. You have a place where they go with their children. Now I looked at this, a very basic thing, but it makes a whole difference to the women trader, the so-called the hustler. So you see, and this is a story that you can tell, and tell them, and they make a whole difference in your content. The second thing is, I fear saying that, but let me just say, there's also money in doing agenda stories. But I say that I fear saying it because we don't want journalism that is driven just by the money that's going to come out of it. But practically, in an era where media is struggling, there is no harm in getting some few coins around that. The third thing that I want to say is the role of the media is to create a fair and just society. To the extent that we bring in content that gives fairness to everybody, I think the media will be doing its role. And that's why I think that should be a key point. Look at it as a question of justice, a question of doing the right thing, serving the good, the public good that the media is supposed to do. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, David. I'm going to allow just 2 comments and then we wind up. kindly, I can see Dennis' hand is up, and we can also take a question from her, and then we'll wind up.
Okay, thank you. I agree with the comments made by the panelists on how to engender gender in news reporting. But perhaps to add to that, I would say that gender desks may be important or are important. But as long as they are staffed by women, they are entrenching the stereotypes. Newsrooms will be more gendered in journalism. For example, when you use the example of Aduda, a man who advocated for gender, or what you just said, because he was doing gendered journalism. We are looking what's good for society. We're not looking at issues with binary lenses. So the best way newsrooms can make gender a non-issue is if politics, education, science, sports bits are headed or run by women. And men also should be, the gender editor should be a man, not just a woman. Yeah? Just the same way that, so that way now it shows that there is a place for women and that these issues for women are not about lamentations or to raise money alone. Yeah. Then the other issue I wanted to speak to is the question of the, how can the media engage with the other publics to be conscious to its needs for panels? Because you see, as long as you are relying on third parties, for example, if other institutions are not gendered in their approach, the media will always have a problem of being accused having manuals. Yeah. So you can send, there's only a limited number of women who may be available or to take the transport offer. But more often than not, there are times when you have started on Monday saying, I have got a page here, give me an opinion by a woman. You go the entire week, there's not a single one you get. You approach people, they're refusing. So it means that people who engage with journalists, other professions, need also, or we need a collaborative approach. Maybe media literacy or media education with our other spheres of engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Let's have one more comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll try to keep mine short and sweet. In terms of just looking at the political space, I've realized with a lot of amazement that we tend to be not only ethnic-centered, but also patriarchal-centered. If you look at most of the key debates where people are discussing key issues, you already see someone like Professor Lumumba, and you already see these men who have made it. But there are women who have made it, but they will be excluded, not because they are not available, but because for such panels, it's like, this is a Jeff Koinange panel, this is a Patrick Lumumba panel, this is, women should not be in this kind of domain, which is wrong. It's a bit difficult to kind of say that this is the solution that we want, because more often than not, women are normally stupefied in the political domain. Like, women are normally asked maybe a very difficult question and put on the spot, and this person is listening to the editor behind the scene. And it's like women need men to exist in the political space, but this has been conditioned by the media. I know my brother there said that it's the other way, that the society has done it, but the media has contributed to it significantly. One of the things that I myself have no problem with is getting money and doing advocacy to fund positive coverage of media. However, this is not sustainable. And also, if we look at the current system, does it mean that when key actors like Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation decide to pull out, does it mean that the journalists who are so-called gender journalists will not have a job? And if this is the case, can we then decide right now to co-create a gender consciousness where we look at it not just like something that we do, but in the interest of our daughters, in the interest of our mothers or in the interest of our wives. Just look at it in terms of, if I was a woman, how would I want this to be done? Because even with the panel that we have here, it would have been great to also see things from a woman's perspective. I know that KBC have talked about it, but also having a consultant who's also able to see what are the pros and cons, what are the things that we can do to make sure that when women are included in the political space, they not only thrive, they don't only survive the hard questions, but they thrive. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Those are two issues raised, sustainability and of course the representation in terms of gender. Would I say 30 seconds, 30 seconds, 30 seconds, and then we finish. I would like to hear what my panelists think about those two issues quickly.
I've continuously said that I like talking about myself. The assistant editor-in-chief, Kenya Broadcasting Corporation, I've said that. But I want to tell you for free that when there's a man holding the same title next to me, people will judge me more harshly than that man. When they are giving that man 80%, they will be tempted to give 20% and put me to task to produce, give reasons why I have to get that 80%. And the person they'll be giving 80%, in my view, I'll even give them negative. So that is true, it is real, it is happening. When you are in that office and a man walks in, they were not expecting a woman, the first thing they'll do is sit back a bit. You know, you'll have to tell them, it's okay, have a seat. After you've talked, engaged, and they leave, they will say that I didn't know that woman had brains. It never happens for a man. It never happens for a man. So I want to say simply, the world is not ready for that powerful woman. And it starts within our families. So when we talk about gender, we really have to know what we are talking about and how we are to instill it from a very early age. When you're buying toys, you buy a girl a doll, you buy a boy or a gun. What are we talking about? Thank you.
Thank you, Millicent. Joe, make it 30 seconds.
Okay. I think it's good that this conversation is now taking us center stage in the newsroom, the gender conversation. Kenyan newsrooms have come a long way from the days when editors would allow into the newspapers letters from readers calling a female columnist a prostitute because she had expressed liberal views about men-women's relationships. We've come a long way, and there's a lot more sensitivity. Not enough, but a lot more comparatively in terms of in content selection, in the relationships in the newsroom, and the need for managers and those who make decisions about deployment of resources to take into account the special the advantages and disadvantages of the different men and women in the newsroom, so that you do not pander to the traditional approaches. But there is still a long way to go. There's a lot that needs. So for me, this is the value of this conversation, and it's partly the value of having a gender desk in the newsroom. We are on the right path in this progress.
Thank you so much, Joe. Finally, David.
Thank you. I would say that in respect to sustainability, that's the challenge that the media now faces. Now, what we see now are short-term interventions towards a long journey. Is a realization that there's a gap, and to go through this, you must have a bridge, but then you are looking forth. And that's why all these initiatives are the starting points, which we believe we can build on, and build on through academia, through the newsrooms themselves getting sensitized and convinced that should devote resources of their own. Then we can achieve that sustainability equation that really lingers at the back of our minds. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Millicent, Joe, and David. We've been talking about the relevance of gender desks in Newsroom. Well, haven't they been a wonderful panel? I think they deserve a round of applause. Thank you so much.